Okay, it was a resounding yes to hearing about the jury selection questions for the Trump trial, so let's get into it. I'm Eliza Orlins, career public defender here in Manhattan for the last 14 years. The easiest thing to do will just be to walk you through the questionnaire and all 42 questions and their subparts and tell you which are questions that we typically see in jury selection here in Manhattan and which are unique to this trial. So it was my understanding that they were going to be pre-screening people for these questions, but now at the top of the juror questionnaire, it does say that each juror will be seated in the box and be asked to answer the following 42 questions. Don't read the questions aloud. Everyone's going to be answering the same ones. State the number of the question and then answer in a loud, clear voice. That's how jury selection goes in every case. But let's get into the actual questions. Okay, the first question is asking what neighborhood someone lives in. That is completely typical, how long they've lived there, and are they a native New Yorker, and if not, where they previously lived. Very typical, comes up in basically every case. Question 2 is, what do you do for a living? How long have you been doing that? If you're retired, what did you do previously? Again, super typical. We see this in every case. 3, who is your current employer? How large is your current employer? Are you self-employed or do you own your own business? Who was your prior employer? Now, I do think this is a little bit more specific than we might get with jurors in your average case, but again, this is like background information type stuff. What is your educational background? Question 4, do you have a high school diploma, college degree, graduate degree, etc.? This is also fairly typical. Number 5, are you married? Have you ever been married? Do you have any children? Again, we hear this in every case. These are not specific to the Trump trial. Next up, if you're married or living with another adult, what does that person do for a living? Again, this is always asked because if someone has a partner or spouse, a live-in roommate even, you want to know what that person does because presumably you're going to go home and be influenced by that person. And if you have adult children, what do they do? Again, super typical. What do you do in your spare time? Do you have interests or hobbies? Okay, again, all of this is what we're seeing. Okay, now we're getting into the second page. Some of these start to get more specific. Do you participate in any organizations or advocacy groups? Which ones? You know, that could or could not be asked, but I don't think I've seen it specific to a juror questionnaire in any of my trials. Okay, but number 9, always asked. Have you ever served on a jury before? If so, when was it? Was it in criminal, civil, or was it a grand jury? And then without telling us the verdict, please tell us whether the jury reached a verdict. Very typical, see it in every case. Now we're getting into stuff that does not typically come up. Maybe if the lawyers want to ask about it, but it doesn't come up in a typical questionnaire, which is, which one of the following print publications, cable or network programs, online media such as website, blogs, or social media platforms do you visit, read, or watch? And then it lists out a bunch: New York Times, USA Today, Daily News, Huffington Post, CNN, MSNBC, Google, Facebook, X, TikTok, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, Newsday, Washington Post, Fox News, Newsmax, MSN, Yahoo, Truth Social, or I do not follow the news, or other. Now, this is interesting and will probably be quite telling for the lawyers. 11 and 12, also not super typical. Lawyers can ask, but it doesn't usually come up in the general questionnaire. Do you listen to or watch podcasts? If so, which ones? Do you listen to talk radio? If so, which programs? Not usually asked. But number 13, have you, a relative, or a close friend ever been the victim of a crime? Please tell us what happened. That is always asked, always, in every criminal trial. Page 3, this is another extremely typical question. Have you, a relative, or a close friend ever been employed by law enforcement? FBI, police, DA's office, Department of Corrections, etc. Have you or a relative or a close friend ever been employed by the federal, state, or local government? Okay, again, we're getting into a little bit more specifics, but we are often asking people about that. Number 16 is, this is pretty specific to this case, but it might be asked in another trial of a financial crime, which is, have you, a relative, or a close friend ever been employed in the accounting or finance field? And then 17, always asked, have you, a relative, or close friend had any education, training, or work experience in the legal field, including but not limited to practicing criminal or civil law? 18 and 19 are usually, I think, combined, but it's asking, have you, a relative, or close friend had any experience or interaction within the criminal justice system, including police officer or other type of law enforcement, which caused you to form an opinion, whether positive or negative, about the police or our criminal justice system? What was that experience? Would it prevent you from being a fair and impartial juror? And then 19, have you, or a close friend or relative ever been accused of, convicted of committing a crime? Or do you, or a relative, or close friend have a pending criminal case? So those are all kind of together, and those are always asked. As for 21A and B, this is a little bit outside the bounds of what's normally asked, but do you have any political, moral, intellectual, or religious beliefs or opinions which might prevent you from following the court's instructions on the law, or which might slant your approach to this case? Do you have any political, moral, intellectual, or religious beliefs or opinions that would interfere with your ability to render a verdict in this case? That's often asked, but in a more general way. Okay, moving on to 22 and 23. These are questions that are asked in a more general way as well, but do you have a health condition that might interfere with your ability to be here on appointed days and times or otherwise prevent you from serving as a juror? And without telling the names, do you have any medications that you take that would make it difficult for you to pay attention or process or deliberate during these proceedings? Number 24 is really just asking about timing stuff, which the judge always gives an instruction about what they anticipate the timing will look like. Court proceedings usually end around 4:30 in the afternoon, but sometimes we might need to work beyond that. Would your schedule and responsibilities permit you to work later if it were necessary to complete the work for that day? And then, do you practice a religion that would prevent you from sitting as a juror on any particular weekday or weeknight? Now we're getting into some of the biases questions. This is kind of typical, but it's not usually asked in this much detail. Can you give an assurance that you'll be a fair and impartial juror and not base your decision in this case upon a bias or prejudice in favor of or against a person who may appear in this trial on account of that person's race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender identity, expression, religion, religious views, age, disability, sexual orientation, or political views? And then, can you guard against allowing stereotypes and attitudes about individuals or groups of people referred to as implicit bias influence your decision? And then we're getting into the specifics. 28 and 29 are very specific to Trump. Have you or a relative or close friend ever worked for any company or organization that is owned or run by Donald Trump or anyone in his family? Have you volunteered for a Trump presidential campaign, the presidential administration, or any other political entity affiliated with Mr. Trump? Have you ever attended a Trump rally or campaign event for Donald Trump? Very specific. Okay, more specific Trump stuff. Are you signed up for, have you ever been signed up for, subscribed to, or followed any newsletter or email listserv run by or on behalf of Mr. Trump or the Trump Organization? Do you follow Donald Trump on social media, or have you done so in the past? Have you, a relative or close friend, ever worked for or volunteered for any anti-Trump group or organization? Have you ever attended a rally or campaign event for any anti-Trump group or organization? Are you signed up for, have you ever been signed up for, or subscribed to, or followed any newsletter or email listserv run by or on behalf of any anti-Trump organization or group? And do you currently follow any anti-Trump group or organization on any social media site, or have you done so in the past? Have you ever considered yourself a supporter or belong to any of the following: QAnon, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, Boogaloo Boys, or Antifa? These are all very specific to this trial and certainly have not been asked in any of my cases. Do you have any strong opinions on whether a former president may be criminally charged in state court? Again, specific to this trial. Do you have any feelings or opinions on how Mr. Trump is being treated in this case? Obviously specific. Can you give your assurance that you will decide this case solely on the evidence you see and hear in this courtroom and the law as the judge gives it? That is typical. That's asked in every case. Do you have any strong opinions or firmly held beliefs about former President Donald Trump or the fact that he's a current candidate for president that would interfere with your ability to be fair and impartial as a juror? No, that's specific to this case, obviously. Okay, we're almost there. Second to last page. Have you listened to any of the following books or podcasts by Michael Cohen or Mark Pomerantz? If so, please let us know. And if it affects your ability to be a fair and impartial juror: Disloyal Memoir, Revenge, Mea Culpa, or People v. Donald Trump. Again, very specific to this case. Then the defendant in this case has written a number of books. Have you read any of these or listened to the audio? If so, which ones? Also obviously specific to this case. Do you have any opinions about the legal limits governing political contributions specific to this case? Can you promise to set aside anything you may have heard or read about this case and render your verdict based solely on the evidence presented in this courtroom and the law is given to you by the judge? That is more typical, especially for cases that have been high-profile cases. Can you give us your absolute assurance that you will refrain from discussing this case with anyone in any manner and from watching, reading, or listening to any accounts of this case during the pendency of the trial? Again, that's very typical, but it will be stronger here because of the nature of this case. Can you assure us that you will follow the judge's instructions on the law, including instructions on reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence? Typical. United States Constitution provides that the defendant has no burden to introduce any evidence to testify in a criminal case. If he chooses not to testify, can you give us your assurance you will not hold it against him? Completely typical. And last but not least, we did it within the 10 minutes. Is there any reason that you would, or anything that would prevent you from being a fair and impartial juror in this case? That is very typical. We hear that in every trial, and made it through. Leave questions in the comments and like and follow for more.